Hi, I'm Kingl. I'm an author, academic, researcher, and I focus on the future of work and what our workplace can be to make its potential truly realized. And one of the really key areas that I've been looking at over the last couple of years, particularly during the era of COVID, is hybrid work and remote work. It's a really tricky one, isn't it? Organizations are taking very different tacks in terms of how they're going to approach the workplace of the future now that we're all coming back to work. Some organizations, of course, are saying, you can work from home, you can come into the office, it's completely up to you. We don't have any sort of mandatory policy. Other organizations are saying, you will come into the office. We are all back now. That's the only way in which you're going to get collaboration, innovation, etc. And some organizations, of course, are taking a hybrid route. So is there a right answer? How do we approach hybrid work, at least in relation to effectiveness, productivity, innovation, collaboration? Well, let me first take a step back. Well before COVID began, in about 2010, I was directing a program of high potential 20-somethings, young, hypo talent. And they came from all over the world. So these were the CXOs of the future. And their organizations had already identified that these people, being Gen Ys, being millennials, acted a little bit differently than a lot of other generations in the workplace. They didn't seem to respond to the same incentives. They didn't seem to want the same things out of work. So I started surveying them because I was curious. And that's often how research begins, right? You ask a question, you realize you don't have the answer to it, so you try to figure it out. And one of the questions I asked is, what do you most want from a workplace? What would really help you feel engaged at work? What would you hope an employer would be able to offer you? Can you believe it? The number one thing they were telling me in these surveys between 2010 and 2014 was work-life balance. And you could interpret that as meaning, well, they just want to work fewer hours. And this is a big problem if we simply stop there. There is semantic discord, ladies and gentlemen, between the generations about what we mean around the phrase work-life balance. So when I asked Gen X's, like me, as you can tell from my silver hair, and baby boomers, what is your definition of work-life balance? What they generally told me was it was some variation of a time question. It's a when statement. In other words, if someone comes to you and asks for work-life balance, they want to work fewer hours. And so when they were having young colleagues come and asking for work-life balance, their inner monologue became some variation of, well, they want to work fewer hours. They don't want to pay their dues. Do they have any idea how many hours I worked when I was their age? They're lazy bastards. And so it goes. But when I asked Gen Ys, what do you mean when you say work-life balance? Generally, the answer I got was some variation of a where statement. Remember, this is the digital native population. What they told me is, I can work anywhere, anytime. And in fact, I do work everywhere, all the time. So what they're rejecting is FaceTime culture. That 9 to 5, chained to the desk, don't leave the office until the boss leaves, etc., etc. What they're saying is, can we at least acknowledge the fact that in a digitally ubiquitous culture, I can work anywhere? And yes, I know, with some functions and in some industries, that isn't possible. I get that. But in many industries and in many functions, we do have a lot of flexibility. But what a lot of organizations were saying, though, when they were confronted with this request is, well, they wouldn't nearly be as productive as they would be if they were in the office. Productivity would plummet if we let people work anywhere, anytime. But then we had COVID. And amidst that tragedy, there is at least one silver lining. We learned something about how effective remote work can be. We had to all work from home. And there were different studies in the US and in the UK asking companies in the midst of everyone in lockdown, are your people more productive, equally productive, less productive than they were when they were in the office? And the answer was startling and clear. Most companies reported their employees were equally or more productive. So we have to put to rest this fib that when we work from home, we're less productive. And we realize that. We have all been there now, haven't we? When we were working from home, the membrane between work and life dissipated. So essentially, we were working from the time we woke up until the time we went to bed because there was no cutoff. A commute is that time when you're ramping up, transitioning from personal to work life, or when you're going back home, your commute is your ramp down from work life to personal life. But if you are working from home all the time, you're probably working way more hours than you did when you were working in the office. Now, that's not true in every instance, but I certainly have found this generally to be so in many different industries and populations. So, if we know that it isn't a productivity issue, we now are thinking, but how do we get the other benefits? Collaboration, innovation, etc. Will we lose those if we let people just sort of work wherever they wish? Well, on this, we do have to be quite thoughtful. Some organizations, I think, have made a huge mistake in trying to engineer a hybrid workforce. And they tried to do a sort of cookie cutter solution. They said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, you can work from home most of the time. But every Tuesday, for example, we all have to come into the office. Tuesday office day, right? But if everyone is just coming into the office because you told them to, and they're sitting at their desks, tapping away at their workstations, probably in many cases with headphones on, what is the point of having them in the office in the first place? They could easily just be at home. If no one is relating to one another, you are getting no benefit from people being in the office. So we have to be more strategic when we ask people to come into the office. So rather than just say, come into the office Tuesdays, come into the office Fridays, instead, why don't we say, for example, on Tuesday the 14th, we're going to be having strategic conversations. And we're going to be thinking about a strategy over the next 5 years. Or we're going to be having brainstorming conversations about new products and services. Things where you can really see that it's useful for people to get together and really get stuck in and work on whiteboards, et cetera, et cetera. Then your people will say, oh, of course, I get it. I know why you want me to come in. It's obvious. And it is. But we have to be much more deliberate then if we say why we're asking people to come into the office. We can't just be arbitrary about it. But there are benefits, too, to having people working remotely. I mentioned innovation. Well, of course, you only get innovation if people are willing to feel that they can contribute, that they have room, space, time to contribute, and that there isn't risk in their contributing new ideas. And in this case, often, having a remote team, in some ways, can be more effective than having people face-to-face. I bet you'll be familiar with this scenario I'm going to describe. You're sitting in a boardroom, and the boss comes into the room and says, okay, brainstorming time. We're going to identify a new product for this market segment. I want all ideas. No ideas too stupid. Throw them out there. What happens? Of course, the most senior people in the room will speak first. The extroverts will speak first. And there will be many people in that room who won't say a word or will maybe contribute, in the last minute of the meeting. And then as people leave, they'll be going, oh, well, they aren't committed. They aren't very creative, are they? But that meeting was set up so poorly to begin with. Remember, people who are introverts, for example, they don't have, for example, some deficit of creativity and innovation, but they don't think aloud like extroverts do. So a really simple hack that you can do is ask people to think about the test question before you start the meeting. And in a hybrid workforce, when you have a remote team, it's even better. Because generally in remote teams, people expect agendas and with a little bit more frequency than they did in the office. So it's so easy to get people to start to contribute ideas and start to maybe put them on a public digital whiteboard before the meeting even begins. So everyone has contributed ideas in their own time, in their own way, rather than creating a forum that is biased toward the extroverts. Of course, there are other biases that would prevent people from speaking, depending on the culture of that organization. It could have to do with education level. It could have to do with one's level in the organization. It could have to do with nationality. Some nationalities, of course, their work culture is more accepting or not of speaking aloud in meetings. It might have to do with gender. It might have to do with all kinds of different issues. So if you can disintermediate the dynamics that happen in a face-to-face, sudden a moment where you're asking people to contribute, all of a sudden you get so many more ideas. And in this way, being remote, not feeling sort of that pressure of the energy in the room to be able to think and contribute in your own way, can actually create a lot more ideas, and in often cases, higher quality ideas. The other issue that can sometimes happen in a meeting is the senior person gives an idea, and everyone else believes, well, that's the answer then. So all I can do is add to that answer. So we're done now in terms of new ideas. So the other thing I would say in remote work is, particularly in a brainstorming scenario, for the senior-most person in the room, don't give your opinion. Let people contribute in their own way at their own time, and maybe if you do have a strong view on the matter, save it for the end. There are all manner of things that can make hybrid work or remote work hugely more effective. I've only had time to touch on a couple, but I hope that's helped a great deal, because we certainly can help the remote workforce thrive.